The power went out the exact second Karen plugged her phone into my garage outlet. Sparks, smoke, and a noise like a dying blender echoed through the cul-de-sac, and her scream could have been used as a tornado siren. Meanwhile, my coffee machine inside sputtered, choked, and died mid-brew, leaving me holding half a cup of bitter liquid and the sudden realization that today was going to be one of those days. Now, most people would apologize if they fried your breaker panel because they couldn't resist mooching electricity. But Karen wasn't most people. No, she yanked her charger out like it had betrayed her, marched straight up to my front porch, and pounded on my door with all the fury of a landlord discovering you painted the walls neon orange. When I opened it, she had that HOA badge clipped to her chest like she was a federal agent about to raid a meth lab. She jabbed her finger at me, accused me of tampering with the community power grid, and threatened to report me for voltage misconduct. I didn't even know that was a phrase. She said it with such conviction you'd think she had a law degree in electrical tyranny. I asked her calmly, too calmly because sarcasm is my caffeine, why she was siphoning my garage outlet in the first place. She sniffed, like the air itself offended her, and declared that all external outlets in the neighborhood were community resources under HOA jurisdiction, which was fascinating, considering I paid the electric bill, not the HOA. When I suggested she could plug her phone into her own house, a mere 3 doors down, she scoffed as if I'd proposed she hike barefoot through broken glass. My outlets are indoor only, she said, with the kind of indignation that implied the very idea of walking inside her own house was beneath her. At that point, I knew 2 things. 1. Karen had declared war. 2. I wasn't going to fire a single shot, I'd just let her blow herself up with her own nonsense. And sure enough, she kept marching herself into deeper absurdity. First, she demanded I unlock my garage and grant her charging privileges, as part of the neighborhood's supposed covenant. Then she threatened to fine me, personally, from the HOA treasury, which as far as I understand isn't how finances, or reality, work. When I laughed, she turned beet red and stormed off, vowing this wasn't over. It wasn't. That night, she came back. Not to talk, but to tape a 3-page official violation notice to my front door. It accused me of electrical sabotage, selfish hoarding of public power, and, bizarrely, endangering the community grid with hostile amperage. I almost framed it. Her letter was such a masterpiece of pseudo-legal jargon that I considered submitting it to a satire magazine. But I decided to hold on to it instead, because if Karen was willing to escalate this far over an outlet, I had a feeling things were about to get much, much juicier. And that was just the first day. By the end of the week, my breaker box would be a battleground, the HOA would be in chaos, and Karen would learn that if you try to weaponize voltage, you'd better not forget who controls the fuse box. By the following morning, Karen had transformed her electrical tantrum into a full-blown neighborhood scandal. At 7:12 a.m., yes, I checked, my doorbell rang with the urgency of someone trying to notify me that my house was on fire. I opened it to find Karen standing there in her robe, hair in curlers, clutching a clipboard like it was the scepter of an unstable monarch. Behind her trailed 2 of her loyal foot soldiers from the HOA, Mr. Jenkins with his perpetually furrowed eyebrows and Linda, who looked like she had been dragged from her morning yoga session against her will. Karen cleared her throat dramatically, as if preparing for a courtroom speech. She informed me that the HOA board had convened an emergency session that very morning to address the serious matter of electrical delinquency. Her tone implied I was guilty of orchestrating a Ponzi scheme out of my garage outlet. I, still holding my coffee, leaned against the doorframe and asked if she wanted to borrow an extension cord for her speech. Jenkins nearly cracked a smile, but Karen's death glare erased it instantly. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a notice written in Comic Sans. Yes, really, stating that I was in violation of the HOA's shared resource doctrine. I asked them where this doctrine was written, since I had read the HOA bylaws cover to cover when I moved in. Karen replied that it was living law, which I assume is a fancy way of saying, I made it up this morning. She demanded I pay a $150 fine and submit proof of grid compliance. I asked if she wanted me to get Elon Musk on the phone for a certificate of Tesla blessing. Linda stifled a laugh this time, though she quickly covered it with a fake cough. Instead of arguing, I told them calmly that I would bring the matter up at the next HOA general meeting. This bought me time, and judging by Karen's twitching eye, it was exactly the response she didn't want. She wanted immediate submission, public humiliation, and a groveling apology. By refusing to give her that satisfaction, I'd painted a target on my back. Sure enough, the next day I woke up to find fluorescent orange warning stickers plastered on my garage door, mailbox, and, somehow, my dog's water bowl. The notices accused me of non-compliance with community energy norms. My dog, who can barely manage to sit on command, had apparently joined me in rebellion. That night I caught Karen in the act. I'd installed a motion-activated camera above my driveway weeks earlier to keep an eye on package thieves. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with an alert. There she was, in full pajama regalia, marching across my yard with a roll of neon stickers and a flashlight clenched between her teeth. She slapped the stickers onto everything like a deranged hall monitor tagging lockers. At one point she even tried to stick one on my recycling bin, but it fell off and she cursed so loudly the mic picked it up. I saved the footage like a treasured heirloom. When I showed the video to Jenkins the next day, he looked horrified. Apparently, Karen had told the board that the stickers were official notices issued by unanimous vote. Jenkins admitted no such vote had happened. He muttered something about Karen taking initiative and hurried away. That was when I realized her power wasn't real. It was manufactured through sheer volume and intimidation. If I could expose her nonsense publicly, the whole HOA house of cards would collapse. The opportunity came faster than expected. A few days later, Karen called a special community assembly in the clubhouse. She announced it via flyers shoved into mailboxes, each one dripping with passive-aggressive bolded words like mandatory, urgent, and grid crisis. I knew better than to skip it, so I arrived with a USB drive loaded with the midnight sticker video, plus a printed copy of her Comic Sans violation notice for good measure. The meeting began with Karen standing at the podium like a dictator addressing her subjects. She launched into a speech about communal integrity, accusing me of endangering everyone's power supply with my selfishness. She gestured toward me repeatedly as if I were an exhibit in a courtroom trial. The room was packed, neighbors shifting uncomfortably, some nodding along, others clearly skeptical. I let her build her case, layer upon ridiculous layer, until she triumphantly called for a vote to fine me $500 for grid sabotage. That was when I stood up. Calmly, quietly, I walked to the projector at the front of the room, plugged in my USB drive, and hit play. The screen lit up with the sight of Karen, in pajamas, scurrying across my driveway plastering stickers like a raccoon caught in a Red Bull frenzy. Gasps echoed through the clubhouse. Jenkins dropped his pen. Linda whispered something that sounded suspiciously like, "Oh my God." Karen froze, her face draining of color. Then she tried to spin it. She claimed she was conducting field inspections. But when the video showed her cursing at my recycling bin, the room erupted in laughter. Someone shouted, "That's not inspection, that's vandalism." Another neighbor asked why she was sneaking around at midnight if this was an official action. Karen stammered, sputtered, then demanded the projector be turned off immediately. But the damage was done. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People started questioning everything Karen had declared in the past year. One man brought up how she once fined him for planting tulips, off-brand of the approved palette. Another woman mentioned the time Karen tried to ban inflatable holiday decorations because they disrupted airflow. Suddenly, grievances poured out like confessions at a revival tent. Karen's power was crumbling right there in front of me. But here's the twist. Just when I thought she was finished, Karen pulled her ace card. She announced that she had already contacted the county inspector about my illegal electrical setup. According to her, my garage wiring didn't meet code, and the inspector would be arriving within the week. She smirked, as if daring me to stop her. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't bluffing. She had escalated beyond the HOA. She was dragging the county government into this circus. That was the moment the stakes truly shifted. What had started as a petty power grab over an outlet had now become a legal inspection that could potentially cost me thousands if Karen's wild claims had any traction. My neighbors looked at me with concern now, not amusement. Karen, sensing the shift in mood, straightened her shoulders and declared, "By the end of next week, this entire neighborhood will see the truth." I walked out of that clubhouse with two realizations burning in my mind. 1. Karen was willing to torch herself just to scorch me in the process. 2. I had less than 7 days to make sure my house passed an inspection I hadn't even known was coming. The real battle hadn't even begun. The county inspector showed up on a Tuesday morning, exactly as Karen had promised, wearing a reflective vest, carrying a clipboard, and radiating the weary aura of someone who spends most of his life listening to complaints about drywall and faulty outlet. His name was Dennis, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Sir, I'm here because I received a report of unsafe electrical modifications." He didn't even look me in the eye when he said it. He was too busy scanning my property like he expected to find a Frankenstein lab humming behind my garage door. Karen, of course, was there to greet him too. She'd parked herself at the edge of my driveway in a folding lawn chair, sunglasses on, sipping iced tea like it was the climax of a reality show. She'd even invited an audience. Linda, Jenkins, and a few other HOA loyalists stood behind her, murmuring in anticipation. The way they clustered together, it looked like they were about to roast marshmallows over the smoldering ruins of my reputation. I greeted Dennis calmly, because panic is Karen's oxygen. If you starve her of it, she starts choking on her own drama. I explained that my wiring was untouched since the house was built, and that Karen's complaint was part of an ongoing feud. Dennis sighed. "That's not unusual," he admitted, clearly hinting this wasn't his first HOA-inspired witch hunt. He asked to see my breaker box and garage wiring, so I led him inside while Karen leaned forward in her chair, trying to eavesdrop through the open door. Now, here's the thing. My dad was an electrician. He raised me to know my way around circuits and panels, and when I bought this house, the first thing I did was upgrade the wiring properly. Everything was neat, labeled, and up to code. Dennis examined the setup with a professional frown that softened into mild approval. "This is cleaner than most new builds," he muttered. He took notes, snapped photos, and asked if I'd ever altered anything without a permit. I told him no, which was true. Karen, not content with being outside, suddenly burst through the door, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. "Check the garage outlet," she barked. "That's where the non-compliance lives." Dennis raised an eyebrow at her theatrics, then glanced at me as if silently asking if this was normal. I just shrugged. He inspected the outlet with the same deliberate care he'd given everything else. Finally, he plugged in his tester, waited a beat, and said, "It's perfectly fine." Karen's face fell like someone had cut the strings of a marionette. She sputtered, "But the surges. The sparks." Dennis asked when she'd witnessed these alleged sparks. She stammered something about charging her phone. Dennis calmly explained that if her charger had produced sparks, it was more likely her device or cable was faulty. Karen immediately tried to pivot. "He must have tampered with it before you arrived." Dennis gave her the same look you'd give a toddler claiming a ghost ate their sandwich. But just when I thought I was in the clear, Dennis delivered a twist. "I'll still need to check your main line outside. Sometimes surges come from there." He stepped into the yard to examine the connection between the power company's line and my house. Karen perked up instantly, tail wagging at the possibility of a bone. That's when Dennis frowned. Not at my line, but at something nearby. He pointed to a heavy-duty orange extension cord running from Karen's yard into the community utility box. It was hidden behind a hedge, poorly, as though a child had played spy. He followed it with his eyes, then crouched down and tugged at it. The cord was jammed into the box with all the grace of a screwdriver forced into a USB port. He looked at me. I looked at him. And then we both looked at Karen. Her iced tea nearly slipped out of her hand. She bolted up and shouted, That's authorized. It's an HOA backup connection." Dennis asked who authorized it. She mumbled, stammered, and then finally said, "I did." Dennis's eyebrows shot up so high I thought they might escape his forehead. He explained, in the driest tone imaginable, that tampering with a community utility box was a serious violation, potentially even a criminal one. The neighbors gasped. Jenkins muttered something like, "I told her not to." Linda suddenly found her shoes fascinating. Karen's composure cracked, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. She claimed she had to do it because my selfish hoarding of voltage left her no choice but to draw directly from the community supply. I swear I almost applauded the audacity. Dennis, however, did not look impressed. He snapped several photos, logged the violation, and told Karen he would need to file an official report. That was the moment the crowd shifted. Until then, they'd humored Karen because she was loud, confident, and relentless. But seeing her caught red-handed with an illegal power setup flipped the script. The murmurs turned from amusement to irritation. One neighbor said, "Wait, is this why our bills went up last quarter?" Another whispered, "She's been stealing power this whole time?" Suddenly, Karen wasn't the sheriff of the neighborhood anymore, she was the outlaw. But in classic Karen fashion, she tried to spin it. She accused me of planting the cord to frame her. Never mind that it led directly to her yard, under her fence, and into her garage window. She shouted that I had orchestrated the entire thing, that I'd manipulated the inspector, and that this was all part of my grand scheme to overthrow the HOA. The problem was, her words no longer carried weight. The neighbors weren't nodding anymore. They were glaring. Dennis wrapped up his inspection by saying my house was fine and that Karen's backup connection would need to be dealt with immediately. He handed her a notice on the spot, then turned to me and said, "Sorry for the trouble, sir. You're cleared." He walked back to his truck, leaving behind the smoldering wreckage of Karen's credibility. But here's the bigger twist. Karen wasn't finished. Later that evening, I received an email, forwarded from the HOA mailing list, that Karen had called for an emergency vote to impeach me from community standing. That wasn't even a real thing. She claimed I had manipulated government officials and endangered the HOA's authority. She scheduled the vote for the next Saturday and demanded all homeowners attend. And if you think that was the end of her escalation, think again. The very next day, I found out Karen had filed a lawsuit against me for emotional damages caused by electrical hostility. I had to read it 3 times to process that those words existed together in a legal document. Apparently, she'd filed it pro se, meaning she was representing herself. The irony of Karen standing in a courtroom, arguing about hostile amperage, was almost worth the headache. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table with the lawsuit in front of me, I realized this wasn't just a feud anymore. Karen wasn't satisfied with HOA control or neighborhood drama. She wanted to drag me into court, into the public record, into the kind of spectacle that could waste months of my life. She wanted a war on every front. And the thing about wars is, you have to decide whether to fight back loud or fight back smart. I wasn't about to scream at the wind like she did. No, I was going to use her own chaos against her. And when the gavel finally came down, Karen would discover that voltage wasn't the only thing in this neighborhood capable of producing sparks. The lawsuit papers sat on my kitchen table like an unwanted guest who refused to leave. I read them again under the glow of the overhead light, savoring every absurd phrase Karen had concocted. electrical hostility, community endangerment, voltage-induced trauma. Each line was a work of art in unintentional comedy, but the summons was real. I had 30 days to respond, or Karen's fever dream would become default reality. Instead of panicking, I did what any rational person with a sarcastic streak would do. I called a lawyer. My neighbor's cousin recommended a local attorney named Marissa, who specialized in dealing with nuisance litigation. She sounded tired but intrigued when I described the situation. "You're telling me she filed this herself?" she asked, and when I confirmed, there was a pause, then a sigh of delight. Pro se plaintiffs are my favorite. They turn courtrooms into improv stages. Marissa agreed to take the case and immediately requested all my evidence. I handed her the midnight sticker video, the Comic Sans violation notice, and Dennis the inspector's report clearing me. She chuckled her way through the documents, then leaned back in her chair with a grin. "Oh, she's going to sink her own ship," she said. "You just have to let her talk." The lawsuit wasn't the only battlefield, though. Karen's emergency HOA impeachment meeting loomed. She'd plastered the neighborhood with flyers accusing me of systematic undermining of governance. She even put one on my windshield while I was at the grocery store, which I admired for its boldness if not its tact. Clearly, she wanted me isolated, humiliated, and cornered before the legal fight even began. On Saturday, I walked into the HOA clubhouse with the quiet confidence of a man holding a grenade pin while the other person was juggling live explosive. Karen had dressed for the occasion. A blazer 2 sizes too small, pearls around her neck, and the smug smile of someone about to deliver a sermon. She called the meeting to order with a gavel she must have purchased on Amazon, because I knew the HOA never issued one. Her speech was a masterpiece of self-importance. She accused me of conspiring with the county inspector, manipulating neighbors, and orchestrating a campaign of wattage warfare. She demanded a vote to strip me of my standing, though she still hadn't explained what that meant. Several neighbors exchanged confused looks. Jenkins, sitting in the back, rubbed his temples like he'd rather be anywhere else. When she finally yielded the floor, I stood up. I didn't bring notes, because notes imply you're trying to win. I wanted to look like I was just narrating reality, which in this case was plenty damning. I began by thanking Karen for her passion, which made her smile for about 2 seconds before I added, "Unfortunately, passion without evidence tends to trip over itself." Then I described, calmly, how she'd trespassed on my property, vandalized my garage with stickers, and been caught with an illegal power hookup to the community utility box. I handed out copies of Dennis's official report for everyone to read. The room shifted again. Linda's jaw dropped as she skimmed the report. Someone in the back muttered, "So she's been stealing power?" Another neighbor whispered, "Is that why our bills went up?" The murmurs grew louder until Karen slammed her Amazon gavel and shouted, "Those documents are forgeries." That was when Jenkins, bless him, stood up and said, "I was there. I saw Dennis write that report myself." Karen's voice cracked as she shouted over the noise, insisting the whole neighborhood was part of my conspiracy. Her control slipped like sand through her fingers. The final blow came from a quiet neighbor named Susan, who had barely spoken in 3 years of HOA meetings. She stood up, held the Comic Sans violation notice in the air, and asked, "Why is this written in Comic Sans if it's official?" The laughter that followed was volcanic. Even Jenkins chuckled. The vote to impeach me collapsed before it began. Instead, someone called for a vote to censure Karen for misuse of authority. The motion passed nearly unanimously, with only Karen raising her hand against it. Her face turned a shade of crimson that would make a fire truck blush. She stormed out, declaring she'd see us all in court. And that was exactly what happened next. 2 weeks later, I walked into the county courthouse with Marissa at my side. The courtroom was modest, with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly and wooden benches that creaked whenever anyone shifted. Karen was already there, armed with a briefcase stuffed with papers. She wore the same blazer and pearls from the HOA meeting, clearly her battle uniform. When she spotted me, she smirked like she had already won. The judge, a gray-haired man with a dry expression, called the case. Karen launched into her opening statement with the fervor of a televangelist. She described me as a menace to the grid and accused me of psychological torment via electrical hostility. She even tried to present a diagram she'd drawn in colored pencil, showing my garage outlet as a villainous storm cloud zapping her phone. The judge stared at it for a long moment, then simply said, "Noted," before asking me if I had a response. Marissa stood, smooth and professional, and presented our evidence. The midnight video, the Comic Sans notice, Dennis's report. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin Karen had built for herself. The judge leaned forward when the video played, watching Karen scuttle across my driveway with her stickers. When it ended, he rubbed his forehead and sighed. Then came the best part. Karen had to cross-examine me. She strutted to the podium, papers in hand, and asked, "Isn't it true you intentionally sabotaged my phone charger?" I replied, "I don't even know what kind of phone you have." She pressed on, "Isn't it true you tampered with your outlet to make me look foolish?" I answered, "The inspector said it was fine." With each question, her credibility unraveled. The judge finally interrupted, reminding her that this was a civil case, not a spy novel. After hours of this circus, the judge ruled in my favor. He dismissed her case with prejudice, meaning she couldn't file it again. Then, as a cherry on top, he fined her for wasting the court's time. Karen gasped as if someone had slapped her with a wet fish. The sound of that gavel dropping was the sweetest percussion I've ever heard. Outside the courthouse, neighbors who had come to watch patted me on the back like I'd just won a championship. Karen stormed past us, muttering about appeals and conspiracies. But the truth was clear. She'd burned every ounce of credibility she had left. Even Linda avoided her eyes as she marched away. I thought that would be the end. I thought Karen would retreat, lick her wounds, and maybe find a new hobby that didn't involve vandalism or lawsuit. But then, 3 nights later, I heard a strange hum outside my window at midnight. I peeked through the blinds and saw Karen in her driveway, setting up what looked like a generator. Extension cords snaked from it into her garage. Sparks flickered in the dark. That's when it hit me. The court had humiliated her, the HOA had censured her, but Karen wasn't done. No, she was about to escalate again, this time with something far riskier than Comic Sans notices or sticker raid. Whatever she was planning with that generator, it wasn't going to end quietly. That humming generator outside my window sounded like the prelude to a horror film. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped onto my porch. Across the cul-de-sac, Karen's driveway glowed like a low-budget sci-fi set. The generator sputtered, cords ran in every direction, and Karen herself stood in the middle of it all with a clipboard, muttering to herself as if reciting an incantation. Her garage door was wide open, revealing what looked like a Frankenstein's workshop. Multiple power strips dangled from nails in the wall. Extension cords coiled across the floor in tangled nests. A space heater, 2 dehumidifiers, and a ridiculous number of scented plug-in air fresheners whined in unison. I counted at least a dozen devices blinking, humming, or sparking faintly. It wasn't just unsafe. It was an electrical apocalypse waiting to happen. I might have stayed hidden, but then she noticed me. "Don't even think about interfering," she shouted, pointing dramatically like a villain unveiling their death ray. "This is a sanctioned energy redistribution unit." The phrase alone nearly made me choke on laughter. She claimed she was liberating power from the grid so neighbors could have equal access. Which was hilarious, considering every cord ran into her garage. By now, a few other neighbors had wandered out in their pajamas, drawn by the noise. Jenkins appeared with his robe half-tied. Susan clutched her cat like a talisman. Linda looked exhausted, as though she regretted every decision that led her to this neighborhood. They all gawked at the scene while Karen puffed herself up, insisting she was taking a stand against voltage tyranny. I decided to play it cool. I asked her, in the calmest voice I could muster, what exactly she thought would happen when she overloaded the system. She snapped back that she had calculated the tolerances. Considering she once thought Comic Sans was a legal font, I doubted her math skills. I turned to the crowd and said, "Maybe we should call the fire department before this redistribution unit distributes sparks into the sky." That was the moment Karen made her fatal mistake. She stomped to the generator, fiddled with the dials, and declared, "I'll show you all the future of communal energy." Then she cranked it to maximum. The explosion wasn't cinematic. It was worse. A sharp pop, a flash of light, and a geyser of smoke erupted from the generator. The cords writhed like snakes, sparks showered onto her driveway, and one of the plug-in air fresheners actually caught fire. Karen screamed, neighbors screamed, and I dropped my flashlight as the generator coughed its last breath and died with a pitiful wheeze. The street went dark. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of something smoldering. For a long moment, we all just stared at the mess. Then, as if on cue, the sprinklers in Karen's yard activated, soaking her, the generator, and the audience of horrified neighbors. It would have been slapstick if it weren't so dangerous. That's when the fire truck arrived. Apparently, someone had already dialed 911. The firefighters leapt out, assessed the situation, and doused the smoking air freshener. One of them scolded Karen for creating a fire hazard, warning her she could have burned down half the block. She tried to argue it was community innovation, but dripping wet and surrounded by melted cords, she didn't look much like a visionary. The next day, the county inspector returned, this time not because of Karen's complaints, but because of the fire report. He cited her for multiple code violations and ordered her to remove every unauthorized setup from her garage. He even mentioned that criminal charges for tampering with the utility box were still pending review. Karen's empire of nonsense had officially collapsed into rubble. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that same week, not to censure her again, but to remove her from the presidency entirely. The motion passed unanimously. For the first time in years, Karen was stripped of her crown. Jenkins, who looked 20 pounds lighter without the weight of her tyranny, was elected interim president. I thought she'd finally fade into the background, sulking in her house like a dethroned monarch. But Karen doesn't retreat quietly. No, she stormed onto the neighborhood email list one last time, sending a manifesto at 2 a.m. accusing me of orchestrating a coup d'état of wattage. She promised she'd appeal to the state legislature, the Supreme Court, maybe even the United Nations. The email was riddled with typos and ended with, "This is not over." It was, though. Weeks passed. The citations piled up, the fines mounted, and eventually a "for sale" sign appeared on Karen's lawn. Whispers spread that she was moving in with her sister across town. On her final day, I watched from my porch as movers loaded boxes into a truck. Karen stood by, arms crossed, glaring at me like she wanted to sear my face into her memory. For once, she didn't say a word. That night, the neighborhood felt lighter. Kids rode bikes without fear of sticker ambushes. Holiday decorations popped up without passive-aggressive memos. Jenkins even organized a block party, where people laughed about the great generator incident while sipping lemonade. For the first time, it felt like a community, not a dictatorship. But the real payoff came 2 months later. I received a letter in the mail. The court had ordered Karen to reimburse me for legal fees. A tidy sum, enough to upgrade my entire breaker panel and buy the world's most luxurious coffee machine. I brewed the first cup the next morning, savoring it like victory in a mug. Looking back, it's almost funny how it all began, with a single phone charger plugged into my garage outlet. If Karen had just asked politely, I probably would have let her charge her phone without a second thought. Instead, she waged a campaign of voltage tyranny, sticker vandalism, and Comic Sans declarations. She tried to bury me in nonsense, but all she managed to do was bury herself. And sometimes, late at night when the cul-de-sac is quiet and my dog snores at my feet, I remember her final words, "This is not over," and wonder if she really meant it. Then I take another sip of my perfectly brewed coffee, listen to the calm hum of my properly wired house, and smile. Because maybe she's right. Maybe she's still out there, plotting her comeback. But if Karen ever does return, I'll be ready, with evidence, with patience, and most importantly, with a voltage supply strong enough to make sparks fly all over again.